let's go. Atlyss is a single-player / online action RPG where you pick a class, explore a fantastical world filled with strange creatures, complete quests, and tackle treacherous dungeons for that sweet loot. A public early access version recently dropped on Steam and has already gotten a ton of positive reception. The game has a really unique low-poly aesthetic, and the character creator is... Well, anyway, the Sanctum acts as your home base and is filled with interesting NPCs to talk to. Alright, let's get this out of the way now. Atlyss is one of those games that perfectly embody the concept of not judging a book by its cover. The problem in Atlyss's case is that the cover looks something like this.
Oh my goodness! Squidward!
And the book's actual content is prefaced with a highly detailed passage describing the author's peculiar interests. Atlyss boldly and proudly wears an aesthetic that a specific group of people absolutely adore, but for the most part leads many outside that group to stare uncomfortably for a second before moving on with their lives.
I can play as a fat furry with a huge ass.
This
better
game is
character
complete and utter
customization
furry
than
bait,
Elden
Hear
and
me
luckily
out.
for me,
Ignore the
I am
anthro
its
of
target
thick furry
audience.
demon,
furry
and
bait.
ignore
Came
the
for the
barely
thick furries,
disguised flesh.
stayed for the
Dungeon
gameplay.
crawler with sauce.
Okay, fine, I'll quit dancing around it. Yes, it's a furry game starring anthropomorphic characters, and I'm not talking Barney the dinosaur here. I'm talking full-on neuron activation, hubba fnaf chica. Why did I write that? Kind of characters. Yes, there's technically not any nudity or other explicit content, but the developer most certainly knew what they were doing when designing the character creator, NPCs,
Can I please bite a chunk out of that ass?
armor designs, and emotes. I'll be straight with you, if sexualized animal characters is a step too far outside your comfort zone, or if you fear judgment from someone finding out you own this game more than you do on missing out on a great RPG, then I understand why you might pass on Atlyss. Trust me, I was hesitant at first as well. Fair point, I can see how that's a tough ask, but you should really trust me when I say that despite the current lack of content and the distractingly well-endowed characters, Atlyss has the makings of a truly timeless game. This is because Atlyss possesses a specific trait that, sadly, is often missing in many modern games. That being, it's an engaging, well-designed, and fun game at its core, made with a lot of soul and passion, and that alone, I think, is worth enduring a bit of discomfort to experience. So, with that little side quest completed, why is everyone singing the praises of this game that's, let's just call it author's barely disguised fetish meets fantasy action RPG? Well, as I stated earlier, it's mostly to do with how Atlyss nails the fundamental mechanics that make action RPGs so enjoyable. And the furry fetish stuff is well done too, I think. Go ask Pyrocynical or something, I'm not an expert here. Hey, don't look at me like that, I'm not— screw it, nobody's gonna believe me anyways. Here's a tier list of the game's races. Moving on. Atlyss goes for a cutesy, early 2000s action-adventure aesthetic, reminiscent of games like Majora's Mask or Phantasy Star Online. The tone of the game is also somewhat dark. Ancient, monster-infested ruins and haunted dungeons are strewn across the lands, and any friendly faces are few and far between. It's clear that this world fell from grace long ago, and now it's up to you, some strangely thick furry warrior, to cleanse the evil and repair this broken world. There isn't too much in the way of lore you can find in-game at the moment, and what lore there is likely subject to change. Regardless, I really dig the overall vibes, and despite the seemingly grim state of the world, many of the characters are pretty upbeat, alongside the music, which helps lighten the mood a little. The music especially is really great so far, with all the tracks complementing the mood of the game while being really enjoyable to listen to. I particularly enjoy the second dungeon boss theme because you're just chilling out when all of a sudden, almond break jump scare. there really aren't many games out there like Atlyss when it comes to visuals and audio, so 2 opposable thumbs up from me in that department. There are 3 aspects that make up Atlyss's main gameplay loop, that being the combat, the movement, and the progression, all of which tie into each other beautifully. But before I discuss any of these aspects in depth, I think it's worth emphasizing the brilliant approach Kisef, yes, that is the actual name of the developer, took when designing these 3 aspects. The game is very hands-off when it comes to teaching you the basics, as you're immediately thrown into the hub world after character creation. You get some simple information about what your controls are, and then the rest is up to you. No tutorial windows that pause the game and force you to read through them, no objective markers or login bonuses to clutter up the HUD. It's just you and the world you've mysteriously been summoned into. The essential parts of the game you need to understand, like quests, movement, combat, and the item system, are all presented in a natural and easily digestible fashion. Dying doesn't cause you to drop anything, and you can easily respec your skills and stats whenever you feel like it. Essentially, the game respects your time and intelligence when it comes to learning about its systems and mechanics, allowing you to take things at your own pace and experiment freely. It's a stellar piece of design that makes both the first and 10th playthrough feel just as smooth and intuitive. It might seem insignificant, but it's one of those things that plenty of games just can't get right, resulting in either excessive and intrusive handholding, or in the game not communicating how it's meant to be played, with both, of course, leading to a lot of wasted time and player frustration. With Atlyss though, I rarely, if ever, felt frustrated or confused or like my time was being wasted doing meaningless tasks, which was a wonderful breath of fresh air. Oh, never mind, that's dog breath. Speaking of, hoons, let's talk about the different races and combat. During character creation, you're given a selection of 5 different races, each of which come with a unique starting ability. These abilities are generally applicable across most builds, though some abilities get more mileage when used by certain classes. Which reminds me, the 3 currently available classes are the Mystic, a flexible mage class with a large variety of spells which require mana to use. The Fighter, a straightforward combat class that focuses on getting up close and personal. And the Bandit, a sneaky, highly mobile combatant that prioritizes avoiding attacks while looking for the perfect opportunity to strike. So, going back to the races, the Imp and Kobold abilities play well with Mystics, the Chang works well for Fighters, the Poon is great for Bandits, and the Birdle is pretty generally applicable. You can also find scrolls as random drops that can teach you the skills from other races, though they're incredibly rare from what I've seen. For now though, your scrawny level 1 furry OC can only do basic attacks, block, and move around. Fortunately, the basic movement and combat in this game are absolutely phenomenal. Let's start with the movement. Your character is incredibly responsive, starting and stopping exactly when you tell it to. All characters have access to a dash and a double jump, which makes both traversal and combat much more engaging. The dash not being direction locked also allows for more precise platforming and control in fights. Combine all the jumping and dashing with the lunging attacks of certain weapons, and all of a sudden you have Mario 64 levels of movement, turning map traversal into a game of the floor is lava, and I love it. Sprinkle in some animation cancelling and your dungeon run back starts feeling like an any percent speedrun. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's one of those games where you can end up just talking with a friend for half an hour while mindlessly pressing movement keys in the hub area. If you play DRG, you might know what I'm talking about. I swear, there's something about indie games and making the most satisfying movement systems out there. But there is a different, perhaps even more satisfying mechanic this game shares with many other acclaimed indie and non-indie action games. That's right, I'm talking about the Adding parrying to action games is like adding grappling hooks to movement games. It just makes the game better, there's no debate. In Atlyss, you can parry enemy attacks by holding block right before you get hit, resulting in the enemy getting stunned for a moment and allowing you to counterattack. The zoomed out camera and enemies usually being 5 to 6 times your size helps a lot when it comes to timing your parry, which is a very smart design choice. You can parry pretty much everything, including projectiles, but if the enemy is a higher level than you, parrying won't work. This is probably a feature that's meant to prevent players from cheesing enemies they otherwise would be far too underleveled to challenge. As long as you're holding the block button though, you'll negate any and all damage even if you miss the parry window, but in return you'll get knocked back slightly and your stamina will be reduced. If you try to block too many hits, your stamina will go to 0 and your shield will break, leaving you vulnerable. On top of that, no stamina means dashing is impossible, so you won't be able to move out of the way of any further attacks. Stamina management is pretty important as there are several skills that also cost stamina to use, so using your block wisely is the key to surviving. The main way to increase your stamina is by pumping strength, but unless you're the fighter class, strength won't be that useful. What you can do instead is equip a one-handed weapon plus a shield. Having a shield allows you to automatically block attacks that are under a certain damage threshold. As of right now though, there are only 2 weapons that are actually one-handed and allow you to use a shield. And now perhaps will be a good time to discuss the weapons. In general, any character can use any weapon, but the weapons always have a base stat which their damage scales off of. Staffs and bells scale with mind, spears, swords, and heavy weapons scale with strength, and katars and bows scale with dexterity. However, using special augmenting stones found randomly in dungeon chests can allow you to change the scaling of any weapon to the stat of your choice. This allows you to use whatever weapon type you enjoy the most, regardless of class, which allows for a lot more build variety and personal choice. The same cannot be done with class-specific armor though, as they have stats specifically meant to benefit that class. But thanks to a recent update, you can now transmogrify them and wear them as cosmetics, so you can play dress up to your heart's content. The drop rates for weapons is fairly high, and the shopkeep Sally sells a cheap basic weapon of every type so you can collect and try out each weapon easily. You can also enchant your weapons and armor at this NPC, giving them a few extra stats depending on the random enchantment you get. The buff seems insignificant, but considering you can enchant every item you have equipped, excluding some powerful boss gear, the boost in raw stats really does stack up. And of course you can re-roll them when you inevitably get bad RNG, at the cost of your life savings. As of right now, there are only a handful of locations to explore, and aside from the dungeons, there isn't much to see. It's mostly sections of infinitely respawning enemies you might need to farm for a quest or two, but there's definitely a lot of potential in making the world more interesting. There are a few segments that require you to parkour across large gaps to open up gates, and there's even a mini-boss early on you can summon by killing a certain amount of enemies out in the field. But as the game is right now, you'll be spending most of your time inside the dungeons as that's where the loot's at. The dungeons themselves, all 2 of them, are pretty good, having a few different possible layouts upon entering. They mostly consist of battle arenas where you fight a couple waves of enemies, with levers, keys, and locked doors in between. The first dungeon has 3 difficulty options, gradually ramping up the toughness of the enemies and adding more environmental hazards. At the end of the higher level dungeons, there's even a boss who can drop some unique and powerful
Boss weapons! Did you say boss weapons?
The bosses can be pretty damn tough, especially when you're underleveled, so it's usually better to do some quests and level up before you actually try to tackle one head on. As you level up, you gain access to new quests that take you to new areas. There are fast travel points in each major area and dungeon that allow you to instantly travel to them from the Sanctum. From the start, you also have access to the recall spell, which swiftly sends you back to the Sanctum and saves you from having to run back and forth, which is another great design choice that keeps the pace of the gameplay high. That about summarizes the loop. Accept quests, fight enemies, sell the loot, then level up and get access to harder quests. When you reach level 10, you choose your class and get access to some exclusive skills. Keep grinding away in the dungeons and complete quests for XP, and eventually you'll run out of things to do. Again, the biggest issue with the game right now is that there isn't enough of it to sate most people's hunger. But for 10 bucks, you could do a lot worse. To finish up this video, I'll do a quick lightning round of smaller issues I have with the game, but keep in mind that most of these are more of a wish list for future content rather than a critique of the game itself. Parrying groups of enemies or multi-hit attacks is inconsistent and often impossible due to the time it takes to drop your shield and put it back up. There's no loot table or enemy guides, meaning you might miss out on rare items that only drop from bosses. Some stack sizes in the storage are way too low, there aren't any skills or weapons that scale with more than one stat, so it's only ever worth putting points into your main stat or vitality. I wish there was some more difficulty options for the dungeons, perhaps limiting your healing or the amount of times you're allowed to die, but also giving a better payout. It's really hard to find masculine clothing. I wish there were more dyes. I wish there was more use to these eyes. I wish I could touch Sally's thigh. And most importantly, we should be able to irritate Enoch. I mean, come on. He can't just walk around like that. And that about does it. If you haven't given this game a try yet, I highly recommend it. As my girlfriend says, it may be small and brief, but it is packed with personality. And with such a strong foundation, I can't wait to see what the future holds for Atlyss. The game can really only keep going up from here. So, check out this game and don't worry about what other people might think of you. Trust me, there's no argument that will convince them anyway. Man, that was a different video. I guess now that we're at the end, I should say that I could have yapped on even more about the multiplayer aspect of the game, but it's not that different from the single player. It's mostly just the nostalgia factor of it feeling like old school RuneScape, where you can see everybody's characters and you can just stand in the Sanctum area just talking to people. There's also the aspect of skills, but they're pretty standard RPG fare, press a button to make an AoE attack or to buff yourself. It's not really that standout, so I didn't feel the need to yap on about it that much. Other than that, thank you for watching, and if you're still listening to this, you weirdo, get out of here. Get out of here! Go play this game. It's good. Alright, see ya.